Well, welcome to the 700 Club, jump-starting the battle against COVID-19. President Biden has brought out the big guns in the fight against the virus, including the promise of 100 million vaccinations in his first 100 days.
The big question, is that enough? Plus, scientists now face another concern about the coronavirus. What is it, and why may it be even harder to stop? Heather Sells explains.
President Biden says that America's vaccine rollout has been a dismal failure so far and blames the Trump administration for not acting with more urgency and coordination.
We didn't get into this mess overnight. It's going to take months for us to turn things around. But let me be equally clear. We will get through this. We will defeat this pandemic.
The CDC says that just 2.4 million have received the needed 2 doses of the vaccine, with hundreds of millions necessary to end the outbreak. On Thursday, Biden signed 10 executive orders to do just that. One expands vaccine production, others mandate masks for travel, lay the groundwork for reopening schools and businesses, and order FEMA to set up vaccination centers. Next month, the CDC will make vaccines available in pharmacies. Biden is promising 100 million vaccinations in his first 100 days. It sounds good, but it's actually just a 10% increase over the current daily pace already set under the Trump administration program. An AP reporter asked Biden if his target should be more ambitious, a point pushed by some public health experts.
Is that high enough? Shouldn't you set the bar higher? That's basically where the U.S. is right now.
When I announced it, you all said it's not possible. Come on, give me a break, man. That's a good start. 100 million. Thank you.
The president dismissing the question before leaving the room. Meanwhile, Biden's chief medical advisor, Dr. Anthony Fauci, says the coveted herd immunity, where a large percent of the population is naturally immune to the virus, could be achieved later this year.
If we get the majority of Americans, 70 to 85% vaccinated by then, we could have a degree of herd immunity that would get us back to normal. The best case scenario for me is that we'd get 85% of the people vaccinated by the end of the summer.
The other big concern, new mutations of the virus in the United Kingdom and South Africa. And scientists wonder if one in California is behind the surge in cases in Los Angeles, and if some of those mutations could weaken the effectiveness of the vaccines.
Work needs to be done in the laboratory to confirm whether or not the vaccine is going to be protective.
One study says the South Africa variant could pose a problem for the vaccines.
But Fauci and other experts believe the mutations won't significantly decrease the vaccine's effectiveness, although more research is still needed. But since the mutations are more contagious, they could lead to a faster spread of the virus, meaning more cases and deaths. And that increases the urgency to get as many people vaccinated as soon as possible. Heather Sells, CBN News.
Well, we need to start thinking in terms of 600 million doses, not 100 million doses. 100 million would be a good start, but it's not sufficient. The bad news is the virus is mutating. And how quickly is it mutating? We don't know. What will the mutation do to the effectiveness of the vaccine? We don't know. All of these things are speculation. But the cold hard facts are we're not going to get back to any kind of, quote, normal, close quote, until the fall, which is a real stunning fact. This is going to be a long slog, and we have to be prepared for it. I know people want to blame the previous administration for the lack of a rollout plan, but let's give them credit for fast-tracking the virus, the vaccination process. So now that we have multiple choices, we may pretty soon have 4 choices for vaccination. All of that is in record time. It's within 9 months. So now let's do whatever's necessary to ramp up production so that we can get it into the arms of people that need protection. In other news, the Senate could move ahead with an impeachment trial for former President Trump next month. Ephraim Graham has that story from the CBN newsroom. Ephraim?
Gordon, Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell wants to push the start of the trial into February to give former President Trump time to prepare. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer will discuss the plan with McConnell. Many on Capitol Hill and some legal scholars question impeaching the former president since he's no longer in the White House. But House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says Trump doesn't deserve a get-out-of-jail card just because he's left office. And President Biden and others are calling for national unity. Trump has hired an attorney to represent him. Trust in the major news media has hit an all-time low. That is according to a survey from Edelman reported by Axios. 56% of Americans agree with the statement journalists and reporters are purposely trying to mislead people by saying things they know are false or gross exaggerations. And 58% agree that most news organizations are more concerned with supporting an ideology or political position than with informing the public. A lack of trust in the media is also found around the world, not just in the United States. President Biden has signed an executive order intended to fight discrimination based on gender identity and sexual orientation and to establish protection for transgendered people. It says children should be able to learn without worrying about whether they will be denied access to the restroom or the locker room or school sports. But critics quickly weighed in. The Heritage Foundation's Ryan Anderson writing, the Biden administration will interpret the order to mean men who identify as women must be allowed in women-only spaces. Boys who identify as girls must be allowed to compete in the girls' athletic competitions, adding the order spells the end of girls' and women's sports as we know them. Turning now overseas, the Trump administration accomplished some historic milestones in the Middle East, with Israel establishing relationships with some Muslim countries under the agreements known as the Abraham Accords. One of the key architects shaping that U.S. foreign policy for nearly 4 years has been U.S. Ambassador David Friedman. CBN News sat down with the ambassador at the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem for his final official interview.
Ambassador David Friedman ended his time as ambassador as he began it by praying at the Western Wall.
Ambassador David Friedman.
Friedman feels work accomplished over the past 4 years will help the incoming Biden administration get off to a good start.
Normally, people come into office and the Middle East is all ablaze, and that becomes a challenge. I think that's not the case here. I think we've left the Middle East in a good place. I would urge real caution in changing any of the dynamic. It ain't broke, so don't fix it.
That includes potentially renewing the Iranian nuclear deal. The Trump administration ended the 2015 agreement known as the JCPOA that had been struck by the Obama administration.
Are you concerned about the fact that the Biden administration has already said that they want to renegotiate or re-enter the Iranian nuclear deal?
Boy, going back to 2015 would just be an enormous mistake, and it could threaten all the advances that we've made in the region. There really is no rational basis to return to the JCPOA. You know, one of the arguments that kept coming up then in favor of the JCPOA was if we let Iran back into the community of nations, they will self-modulate. They will self-correct. 5 years later, we know the truth. We know that they didn't self-correct. The idea that we would make a deal with Iran that would give them a path to a bomb is, frankly, insanity.
Friedman also believes such a move could threaten the Abraham Accords, an achievement that took many by surprise, but not Friedman.
The seeds of these relationships have been there for years. They were there under the Obama administration as well. They were there. They needed some water. They needed some fertilizer. They needed some real engagement. But we knew from the beginning that we were onto something.
Ambassador Friedman pointed out what set the Trump administration apart.
What I think I'm most proud of is that our administration really extended to Israel not just the courtesy, but the right to self-determination, to really decide for themselves how to govern. And I hope that courtesy continues to be extended, because that's where I think we really made a difference.
That set the stage for historic moves, such as the United States recognizing Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, declaring Jerusalem as Israel's capital, and moving the U.S. Embassy there.
I think the most significant event of the 4 years was moving the embassy to Jerusalem. I think so much came from that. You know, I think when we moved the embassy, when we recognized Jerusalem, I think it just opened up enormous possibilities for the U.S.-Israel relationship, and I think it put America really on the right track.
Friedman also helped change the U.S. approach to Israel's biblical heartland and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
What we did was very much in the best interests of the United States, not just the best interests of Israel. And I think the proof is in the fact that after we moved the embassy and after we recognized sovereignty over the Golan Heights and after we did all the other things that we did, not only was there not an explosion of violence, but there was an explosion of peace. We were able to achieve, once-in-a-generation agreements with Bahrain and the Emirates, Sudan, Morocco, Kosovo, all Muslim countries.
As ambassador, one Bible story inspired Friedman. He kept this painting of the story of the sin of the 10 spies who went into the Promised Land.
The one sin I don't want to commit is the sin of the spies, the sin of not having enough faith or confidence or vision in the relationship between Israel and the United States and the importance of keeping that as strong as possible.
While the new administration hasn't announced the replacement, many experts on both sides agree Ambassador Friedman will be a tough act to follow. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, the U.S. Embassy, Jerusalem.
Major milestones in a relationship we certainly want to grow stronger. Gordon?
Well, hats off to Ambassador David Friedman. I consider him the best ambassador in the history of the relationship between the United States and Israel. What was accomplished in 4 years, many people thought was absolutely impossible, but yet he was the architect of it. Mike Pompeo was the architect of it, and President Trump was the architect of it. How many things changed and then changed permanently? They followed the advice of the U.S. Congress to move the embassy to Israel, to Jerusalem, recognizing Jerusalem as the capital. They stopped the funding of terrorist attacks against Israeli citizens. They stopped the funding of UNRWA, the funding that went to the Palestinian Authority to pay the families of these so-called shaheed, the terrorists who carry out these terrorist attacks, recognized Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights, and then the Abraham Accords, where on a piecemeal basis, let's make peace with the Arab nations surrounding Israel. Under the previous administration, under the Obama administration, Secretary of State John Kerry, that was considered impossible. That was considered undoable. But in 4 years, they achieved the impossible. So congratulations to Ambassador Friedman. You're going to go down in history.